What's going on, everyone? Hey, I'm Mr. Watson. Just in case you forgot your teacher's name, it's been a long weekend, so you may like, who is this guy? But I'm recording this on Monday, so we're not in school today. We're not. I'm not working, so I'm dressed a little bit more casually than I would be if I was in the classroom. But the way a lot of things in this class will work is that you will have recordings of me teaching the lesson. And the way I like to, and the reason I like to do that is because, some people work more quickly than others. Some people work a little bit more slowly. So this way, if you can get on to Google Classroom, with a couple classes on Friday, we tried to get everyone on Google Classroom and it didn't work for everyone. There were three or four people in each class that were unable to get on. But once everyone is on Google Classroom, you'll be able to watch these lessons. They'll be probably 10 to 20 minutes a piece. I'll have some notes for you. They'll appear on the screen. And that way you can more or less work on your own. Now, the great thing about me recording these lessons for you is that you can watch them. I will be in the room when you are watching them. So if you get stuck somewhere and you're like, hey, I don't know what you mean here, I'm right in the room and I can answer that. It frees me up to work one on one with students, maybe one on two, something like that, a small group. But most people, will probably watch the lesson like, oh, okay, I kind of know what to do. And even if everyone has, a question, I can get to people throughout the class. So it won't be that bad. I've been doing class this way for about 2 years now. Even before we had to go into remote learning. And I think most people like it because it gives them a lot of freedom to work at their own pace. So if you're watching this, hopefully you were in class when we read the first 4 pages, just a little bit, the first 4 pages of The Care and Feeding of Your Baby Killer Unicorn. And a couple times people in class, people were like, wait, does the unicorn kill babies? Or is the unicorn a baby? We don't even know that yet, and I don't want to spoil it. So, but it is possible that both are true. That the unicorn is a baby, and that it could possibly kill babies, which would be doubly bad, I guess. But with this short story, what I want to do is review probably a lot of the things you learned in seventh grade. Seventh grade was a year ago, and you might have forgotten some of these things. So we're going to go over what English teachers love to call plot elements. Plot elements. Like in this lesson, I'm going to talk about setting, protagonist, antagonist, little bit of conflict, and maybe a little bit of point of view. But and another good thing about these lessons, if you don't understand something, you can pause, rewind, all that stuff. So the first thing about Baby Killer Unicorn that I want to talk about is the setting. So right now, with only 4 pages in, I'm hoping that you can possibly give the setting, at least for the first 4 pages. It might change a little bit, but setting is always when and where the story takes place. When and where the story takes place. I think a lot of students, when it comes to setting, they remember, oh, where the story takes place, but the when is also very important. So, um, one thing that we might want to talk about, like this story would be very different if it took place on the moon or if it took place like in the Wild West in the 1850s in California, or if it took place in like 2050, in the future. So the when is very important. Of course the where is too. But and this there might be a little hint here because on a Google form that you will find in Google Classroom. It's the first one of the year. I am going to ask you, what is setting? And then what is the setting of Baby Killer Unicorn? So right here, if you're watching 5 minutes in, you're going to know the answer to this. Maybe you knew it already. Feel free if you want to pause the video, like, hey, I already know, and you want to talk about it with me, let me know. I would like to know what you think. But the setting for Baby Killer Unicorn is definitely going to be like at a carnival or maybe like at a fair. There are a lot of fairs where we live here in Maine coming up, or maybe there have been a few already. In fact, my family and I, we went to the what was it called? The Topsom Fair. The Topsom Fair. They did not have a like a sideshow tent like this fair has or this carnival has, but the first 4 pages of Baby Killer Unicorn definitely take place at a fair or a carnival. And they're spoiler alert, if you haven't read pages like 5 and beyond, they will go into the tent. And we've been promised that there is something in the tent. Yeah, it might be a unicorn. That would make sense, right? Venom, I think they called the unicorn, the world's only captive unicorn. So this takes place where? At a carnival. Now, another question is when? When does it take place? I think it could take place in 2021. Seems like these teenagers, they could be living in our time. I don't think anybody mentioned a cell phone, but that's okay. I mean, we only got to meet them for a few minutes. So maybe they didn't pull their cell phone out, but it is very likely that maybe 2010, who knows, maybe 2025. I don't think a lot is going to change. Who knows though, right? Who thought COVID was going to happen in 2021? But if you're looking for a good term that just like, it might be today, it might be tomorrow, it might have been last year. It definitely wasn't during COVID though, because nobody mentioned wearing a mask or anything. But you can say present day. Present day is just a great term to let, if your English teacher ever, like me, asks, hey, when do you think this setting is? You could say, well, it probably takes place in present day. And I have a couple years there, but I mean, it might be like 2009, might be 2031. It's just kind of like, yeah, probably around now. I mean, they're not using horse and buggies to get around. They're not using spaceships to get around. It's probably present day. So the setting for at least this part of Baby Killer Unicorn would be a fair, town fair. We don't know if it's a big city or a small city yet, but we can just say, it's a carnival and it takes place present day. That's the setting. A carnival, present day. Boom, for setting. The next thing I'd like to talk about is right up here. Protagonist. Protagonist. You may have heard of this. I mean, it's a big word. Protagonist. A lot of times English teachers love to come up with the big words just to make ourselves sound smarter. So the protagonist is simply the main character of the story. It's just the main character of the story. Not always, but sometimes the narrator. And that's what's happening for this story. I mean, I think we might want to stay tuned. Things could change, but right now, so far, it seems like the narrator, that's the person telling the story, is also our protagonist. We're going to get into point of view in a little bit, not in this lesson, because it can be a little bit tricky. Right here. We don't know the person's name because she is telling. Messed up on that. She is telling her own story. Hang on, let me fix that. She is telling her own story. Typo there. Not great for an English teacher. I just changed it and it didn't change. I promise you. I changed it. Let's pretend it says telling because she is telling her own story. In a later lesson, we will find out that that is first person, but we don't know the protagonist name yet because she's telling her own story. Nobody that I remember called her by name, and she didn't tell us. We'll probably eventually learn, but right now the protagonist, the narrator, the main person of the story, probably the person in the story that we will be rooting for, because we're going to get to conflict in a minute. She's just unnamed right now, but she's got a history. Something happened in the woods last fall. She was close enough to hear those blood curdling screams with the unicorn that killed those kids. I believe that's exactly what was said there. So, in one of the other classes, maybe your class, somebody mentioned like maybe she was the killer. Like she seems to know an awful lot about it. How did she get away if it was a unicorn that killed those kids? So we do already have quite a few questions here, 4 pages in. So for there to be like the main character, the good person in the story, the person we're rooting for, they got to have some kind of struggle. Like think about any movie you've ever watched. Think about any book you've ever read. Hopefully, it's a lot of books. There's always a good person and a bad person. I mean, they're not always people. We'll get into that when we talk more about conflict. But to keep it simple, there's usually a good person and a bad person, and they have some sort of struggle. We don't know what her struggle is yet. And we don't even know this yet. But the antagonist, they are the opposite of the protagonist. So you have like pro, anti. Pro is usually good, anti is usually bad. Maybe you've heard like anti-vaxxers recently, so they are against getting vaccinations. So an antagonist is against something. And what is that something? They're against the protagonist. So if you can figure, we can't yet, but if you can figure out what the protagonist and the antagonist of any story is, then that means you have found the conflict. And it is important in any story that you have some sort of conflict. Think about the Marvel movies. Usually the protagonist is the person or thing, maybe Groot, is Groot a thing? The person or thing that the movie is named after. So Guardians of the Galaxy, like they're your protagonists. You know, you might have a couple in there. I would argue, if you've ever seen the Guardians of the Galaxy, like the main protagonist, and feel free if you want to pause this and let me know. Hey, I think it's Star-Lord. I think he's like the one protagonist. And then what in the first one, I don't remember the guy's name, but there was some Ronan. Was it Ronan? I don't remember. But a lot of times lately, it has been what's that guy? Thanos, right? Thanos? Yeah. Thanos has been the antagonist for a lot of the movies. But maybe he's misunderstood. Maybe he wants to do the right thing and he wants to save like half of the people in the world. Like sometimes antagonists can be pretty complex. Like I think Thanos thinks what he's doing is the correct thing to do. Like he's even willing to risk his daughter. So the protagonist and antagonist, you know, you have the Avengers versus Thanos. Think about Toy Story, at least in the first one of my favorite movies of all time. Your protagonist, the main character of the story, it's Woody, right? And in the first story, Toy Story, the first Toy Story, the antagonist, with movies and longer books, sometimes these conflicts change, but certainly at one point in Toy Story, even the first one, the antagonist would be Buzz. And we'll talk about sometimes how when the conflict can be the protagonist against themselves. Like for the Woody thing, later on in the movie, if you remember, when Buzz gets pushed out of the window, like Woody gets caught up in all that. So Woody is the reason that Buzz fell out of the window. So you could also say at one point, like Woody is his own worst enemy. Like he is both protagonist and antagonist, and we'll talk about that. It's called person versus self with conflict. Just for anybody who remembers that from last year. Right, I think that is going to do it for today's lesson. There will be a Google form on the early part here of Baby Killer Unicorn, and of course, at any point during the class, when you have a question, just raise your hand. Let me know. I'll come around. I mean, if maybe the person next to you, just kind of whisper to them. If you feel comfortable enough, you can definitely ask them and have those conversations with that person right next to you about this story. Work your way through it, all that good stuff. We'll try to get everybody onto Google Classroom very soon. Hopefully within the next couple days. We'll figure it out. Get Mr. Lecomte on board and he'll figure it out. All right. Thanks for watching.